It's a video on the watch list area or functionality of the SP 500 Analyzer app. It's here in the SP 500 worksheet. Specifically, we'll be talking about in this video this area and through here. There are other videos available. I invite you to go out to the Polaris Investing YouTube channel, and the playlist on the SP 500 Analyzer has several other videos. The watch list area is a place for you to enter in specific tickers. Now, what I've got shown here is just some 4 tickers that have previously been entered. Actually, were entered through this idea of saved watch list, but that is discussed more in another video exclusively covering saved watch lists. What we're seeing here is the sample work list being displayed. But this area in through here is where you would enter in additional tickers, assuming that you're not using saved watch lists. But you just enter your tickers in here, and the information would be displayed off to the right. Now, the reason that the watch list is shown in the same worksheet as the S&P 500 portion over here is so that you can do a more direct comparison between stocks in the watch list and stocks in the S&P 500 portion. Now you scroll over to the right here and notice here in the watch list area you've also got company, sector, and industry information for items or tickers in your watch list, assuming that they're associated with the S&P 500, because it's only S&P 500 profile data that's stored in the spreadsheet. If you were to enter a ticker that's not in the S&P 500, this information would be blank unless you filled it in on a saved list. And again, go out and watch the saved list video for how to do that. Above sector here is a list of all the sectors that and then whether your tickers belong to any particular one of those sectors. And so for here, Apple, Microsoft, Netflix, and Twitter, all 4 of them are in the technology sector, so they make up 100% of the stocks that's in your current watch list. All the other sectors are in orange, just to highlight that you do not have any stocks currently in your watch list from those sectors. That comes in more play when you're dealing with building out an index beating portfolio, and there's a separate video on that called index beating. I expect you to go out and watch that if you're interested. So back over here, I'm going to switch. I know I haven't been through saved list, but assume you're going to watch that video. But if I switch it to none, this video was originally recorded. A pop-up message is now displayed when you select the watch list none or blank. The pop-up reminds you that you cannot save a watch list named none or blank, and suggests you type in a name in U19 to use if you later decide to save the watch list. Again, watch the save list video for more information on saving watch lists. Notice selecting none clears out everything in the watch list area. This allows you to start over with a clean slate. As I go down on any empty row here and I type in a ticker, so I'm going to type in a Splunk, which is not part of the S&P 500. You notice nothing shows up when I first type in the ticker. And the reason for that is one is it's not an S&P 500 stock, so you're not going to see any profile information associated with the company displayed. Second is you're not going to see any price information, because we don't limit the number of times go out and grab from the internet pricing information. So the idea or the theme throughout this S&P 500 Analyzer app is to minimize trips out to the internet to get pricing information. And this is an example of where just one ticker being entered in isn't enough to cause price information be pulled from the internet. I want to go ahead and enter in another ticker. This one, General Motors, is part of the SP 500, and so we do see some information relative to the S&P 500 that's stored in the spreadsheet. Knowing the beta is some profile information, number of shares, default that you're assuming, that's being assumed that you're wanting to purchase. Now the default is actually, because it is an S&P 500 stock, it'll go out and look at the total outstanding shares for General Motors and divide it by 100 million. And then it says, okay, what's left? That's 15, and it rounds it, and then you just assume that you can start off with 15 shares. Now, where that comes into play is if I enter another, say, company from the S&P 500, Procter & Gamble, its default is now 25, and I keep adding in other stocks from the S&P 500. The default shares will end up creating relative number of shares compared to the weighting in the S&P 500. So it's a way that if you're going to view this watch list as a portfolio, it's a way to weight your purchases across the different stocks as they're weighted in the S&P 500. We'll talk a lot more about that in the index beating video. Now you can change that, the default, that if you want to only have, instead of 100% of that default value, you can say I only want to use 80%. So now if I type in yet another stock, let's say IBM, I'm not getting 100 million of the outstanding shares. I'm getting that number and then 80% of that. So it's just a way to racket down the default values to fit your budget. And then you can overwrite any of these. You can say, well, instead of 7 shares, I want to be a little more heavily weighted and do 10 shares. And you notice that the background turns to all dots to indicate that the default has been overridden. All right, once you've entered in the tickers that you're thinking about, at least for now, you would then go up here and just hit M1 and do a refresh, and it'll detect that new or changes have occurred to the watch list area, and not only bring in the current price but also bring in historical prices. So you do not go up and do anything with historical prices in terms of changing the date or anything like that. It'll know that not only does the current price need to be brought in, but also the historical price if something's changed in the list of tickers that are in the watch list. All right, so let's talk about briefly each column here in the watch list. Obviously, the first one, column U, we just entered in. You enter specific tickers in here. Next column V is showing whether the ticker that you've entered in is in this left portion over here, this portion of the S&P 500 that you're currently got displayed on this worksheet. If it is, then it'll even show you the line number. So here Procter & Gamble is here on line 22 of the portion of the S&P 500 that you're currently viewing. IBM is on line 47. If it's blank, it means that it's not in the portion. Next column over, column W, will indicate whether the stock is an S&P 500 stock. So it may not be in the portion that's being displayed to the left, but here you can see General Motors is the 98th. If you read the comment, it's actually one less than what's being shown, but it's the 98th most heavily capitalized stock in the S&P 500. Splunk is blank because it's not even in the S&P 500. Next column over, we've already talked about the default number of shares. Now, since Splunk is not in the S&P 500, I don't have the data to know what the current outstanding shares are, so can't create a default. So you would need to enter in, based on your budget, how many shares you're looking at purchasing or have purchased. And so as soon as I did that, you notice that now there's a roll-up information up here, because now every ticker in the watch list has a value for this, at least in column X. You can now add this all up and get a roll-up value, which is the total number of shares across all the tickers that make up this watch list, or it can be thought of as a portfolio. Next column is the beta. Now the beta is if it's an SP 500 stock, then it's part of the company profile information, and it is the historical calculated beta. But when you're thinking about purchasing a stock or selling a stock or trading a stock in general, you want to be thinking forward and thinking more about the categorization of risk and not so much the historical calculation of risk. But just be clear that this is a historical number. There is no number for Splunk because it's again not part of the S&P 500. Therefore, that data is not available to the spreadsheet. So, assuming you go out and look it up, you would enter in the beta, or if you choose, you could even think forward in terms of how you would categorize the beta going forward. But let's say you go out and you look it up, and it's something like that. Now we see a roll-up for more of a portfolio view. Saying that if you think of these 4 stocks as a portfolio, then the portfolio has a beta of 0.9. Next column is the historic price information. And you notice here that there is a price for the portfolio. Think of the portfolio almost like an index, and based on the weighting and things like that, it computes a kind of a portfolio price. And then the same thing for the current price. The market cap is just price times out number of shares that you decide to purchase, and then the addition of that gives you that number up there. This is the essentially the dollar change between the historic price and the current price for the portfolio or for your entire watch list. Okay, next column over is the price change between the historic price and the current price. And then it's, since we now have shares for every ticker or every ticker in the watch list, we can do a roll up and see what the overall change is for at a portfolio level. And then the next column over is the portion. It's based on this total market cap. What percent is the market cap? So for like Splunk, it's 1220 divided by 49. That's 24.9%. And then when you add all these percentages up, you get 100%. Now these other numbers above the 100%, this percent here represents only the S&P 500 portion. So if you add those three up, you get 75.1%. And then this one is a further detail around portion, and it has to do with this value up here. What tier are you currently looking at? And if we wanted to look at only tier 1s, then that percentage would reflect how many of our tickers are considered to be tier 1. If you're not familiar with that concept, you should go watch the introductory video on the S&P 500 Analyzer app. Tier 2, you can see that 38.6% is, which is the Procter & Gamble, is a tier 2, and then tier 3 is 27%, which represents the IBM stock. I'm going to return it back to all. So when it said all, it just means all the stocks that are over here on the left that are a portion of the S&P 500 that's currently being displayed. So we're displaying about 66% to the left, but of all S&P 500 stocks, regardless if they're displayed or not, it's 75%. And then again, all the portfolios, including, or all the stickers, including Splunk, which is not in the S&P 500, adds up to 100%. All right, this next column is on the price-earnings ratio. And since earnings is known, part of the company profile information for S&P 500 stocks, we can compute the PE for these three companies. But without earnings, it can't do it for Splunk, so you would have to manually go look it up. And let's say the PE is currently 24. Now, that is an explicit value, and it'll always be 24 unless you change it. So even though the price may change, earnings may change, just don't have the information to make that dynamic, so you'd have to come back and enter any significant change in earnings or price that would impact the price-earnings ratio in a big way. Dividend yield, somewhat the same thing. Now Splunk doesn't have a dividend yield, so it doesn't really be not an issue for Splunk, but if the dividend were to change or price were to change drastically, you would need to come in and update that as well. This column here, AH, has to do with the Polaris investing site. The theoretical investment return is automatically populated in the spreadsheet for the SP 500 stocks. We'll stress it's theoretical, and if you're familiar with the Polaris investing site, you know that there's a practical investment return and a theoretical investment return, and it's best to base your future investment decisions on the practical investment return. So let's say we go with, I'm assuming you go out to the Polaris investing site, use the site to come up with a practical investment return, then you enter it in here. Let's say you determine that you're going to shoot for 16%. And actually I would assume you do the same thing for these other three stocks, is replace these theoretical returns with the practical, or leave them if you feel like it's more representative of what you think is attainable going forward. But once I've got values for every item in the watch list, then we get a roll-up at the portfolio level. Next column is just giving you a rank, so you know which returns are higher. So here you can see that General Motors has the highest ranked return. And then this last column that I'll discuss is what the price times the portion of the portfolio times the rate of return you're expecting represents the total contribution you're going to get from that you're planning on from any one stock. So you can see here that 42.5% of the total return of 10.7 is coming from being planned to come from General Motors. And this ranking here, again, I'm just back checking, is actually just the ranking here and not this ranking. So with all the values either populated for you or filled in explicitly by you, you then want to at last go back, and if you want to view these four stocks as a portfolio, you want to really just pay attention now to the roll-up of the return that you're targeting, annual return for the next 5 years, compared to the risk, relative risk relative to the overall market that you're taking. And once you're comfortable with that, then you'd log in this watch list and save the spreadsheet and just continue to monitor. Open up the spreadsheet and just compare with these, update your prices, like I'll do over here. The current prices will update, and just keep status of how your watch list is going. And again, if you want to be able to have multiple watch lists, I recommend you go out and watch the Saved List video. And one last comment is be careful that if you're not operating with watch lists, that if you were to come in and reselect from this cell here, you would clean out the watch list area. So I'll end the video with that if I go back and do none again, it then cleans them out. But if you're not using Saved WatchLists, you would never need to make that selection in column U19. All right, thanks for watching.